Okay, in a previous video or in class, we talked about the story problems with the canoes and kayaks. And what we are trying to do is maximize profit. So we would set up our story problem like we did before. I think this one, maybe they divided through by 1,000 or 100 or something, right? But in the gist, this is that problem. All right, but instead of graphing it to get the corner points and making the chart, we're going to do the simplex method. So to do that, we're going to take our inequalities. We only have two of them here. So x1 plus x2, and we're going to leave a big gap equals 65. We're going to turn it into an equation. And then 4x1 plus 5x2, leave a gap, that's 300, okay? And then we're going to bring the 25x1 over to the other side. So to get rid of a positive, you would subtract it. And to get rid of a positive 30x1 or x2, you would subtract it to both sides. So on the right, the 25 positive and 25 negative cancel, and 30 and negative 30. So you have a 0 over there. So on the left side, what used to be our objective function is now negative 25x1, negative 30x2. Leave a big gap, and then you have your z, and it equals 0. Okay, so those are my three things I get when I change them to equations. But for me to go from these inequalities to equations, I need something to pick up the slack. So on the first one, I'm going to add slack 1. So I have x1 plus x2 plus slack 1 equals 65. The second one, I'm going to add slack 2. So I have 4x1 plus 5x2 plus slack 2 equals 300. And then I have my bottom row, which is the negative 25x1, negative 30x2, plus z never moves, so it's positive, equals 0. And that is called our objective row. Okay, we are going to turn this into a matrix. Now, the way I like to do that is I like to take my x1 and x2s and write those first. So I would write 1, 1 in the first row, 4, 5 in the second row. I draw a big line, and under that put negative 25, negative 30. Those are my x1s and x2s. Then I would have my diagonal of 1s, and that would be for my slack 1, slack 2, and my z. So I'm going to write a 1, go diagonally, put another 1, and then in the bottom row, diagonally, I'd have another 1. And fill in with zeros above and below those. Okay. And then on the other side of a line going vertically, you're going to write your total. So that would be 65, what do I have? 300 and 0. Okay. Now, again, notice when we do these, we use z and x's when we're talking about maxes. Our main inequalities all have to be less than or equals to. If we do this method, they all have to be less than or equals to. And again, in either method that we've done, the variables have to be positive or 0. So regardless, x1, x2, if we do x and y, they have to be greater than or equal to 0. All right, now we're ready to do our pivots. All right, pick the most negative in the objective row. So go to the bottom row, okay? Most negative, okay? Then you do ratios. So you take 65, divide by 1. That's just 65. And then you're going to take 300 divided by 5. And I think that's 60. And you want to pivot on the smallest ratio. So when you divide, you want to pivot on the smallest number. So 60 is smaller. So we're going to pivot on the 5. Okay. So again, what does a pivot mean? Well, number one, your pivot row is permanent. So rewrite 4, 5. I'm going to put a box around it. 0, 1, 0, my big line, and then 300. That row is permanent, okay? But I want to get a 0 above and a 0 below. All right, so I can do work on scratch paper, 5 and 1. So if you're confused, 5 times 1 is 5. So 5 and a negative 5 are going to do what you want. So I am going to multiply the top row by a negative 5. So multiply everything, both sides of the line, multiply everything by a negative 5. Then I'm going to add it to row 2, and I'm going to get a new row 1 because row 2 is permanent. All right, so let me go ahead and do this multiplication here. All right, I'm going to get Desmos up in case I need it. All right, so let's do this scratch work right there. Okay, so I am going to get, so this is what, row 1 times a -5. I'm going to add it to row 2, which is already good. And I am going to get a new, well, I can't get a new row 2 because that's permanent. I'm going to get a new row 1. So what do I get? -5, -5, -5, 0, 0. Okay, 65 times 5, and that would be what? -325. Okay, sorry about the sun there. Let me kind of zoom out a little bit. All right. Okay, and then the second row is what I want. So I have 4, 5, 0, 1, 0, 300. And I'm going to add to get a new row. So there's my pivot. So -1, these should cancel and get 0, which is good. Money, debt, -5, 1, 0, -25. Now, this is a problem. Remember, our total column has to always stay positive. So you can just fix it at the end. I'm going to multiply through by a negative, and that's going to change the sign. So this -1 is going to go to a +1. 0 stays neutral. -5 goes to a +5. +1 goes to a -1. 0 stays neutral, and that 25 goes to a -25 goes to a +25. So just make sure your total column stays positive, because that's what you're saying when you say x1 has to be greater than 0, x2. You're saying that your eggs or your flour, TVs, whatever you're talking about, has to stay positive. So this is my new row 1. So 1, 0, +5, -1, 0, and then +25. I'm going to write that in my row. Okay, now my pivot is between row 2 and row 3. All right, well, you could multiply them if you're confused and use 150. So you could multiply this row 2 by 30, and multiply this row by 5. You don't need a negative because you already have a negative to get a +150 and -150. But I noticed that 5 goes into 30. So 6 is smaller. So I could just multiply row 2 by 6, and I would get 30, and I already have a -30. That's easier. But if you're stuck, you can always just multiply and use 30 on all that, 5 on all that. Just make sure you have opposites. All right. So I'm going to multiply by 6 because it is smaller. So times 6, the entire row. And again, I know it's my permanent row, but I am doing this on scratch paper. All right, so let's look. So I'm going to take row 2, my pivot row, times +6. I'm going to add it to row 3, which I already like. And I am going to get a new row 3 because row 2 is permanent. All right, so let's do the math. So I get 24, 30, 0, 6, 0, 1800. And my bottom row, I get -25, -30, 0, 0, 1, 0. Okay, and I'm going to add those two. So money, debt, I owe $1. These cancel. I get 0, 6 and 0, 6, 1, and I get 1800. All right, I'm going to write this in my new bottom row. Okay, so I'm going to take that answer. That's my new objective row. So -1, 0, 0, 6, 1, 1800. Okay, and again, all of my totals are positive. That's good, right? Either 0 or positive. Okay, now notice this is not done. Okay, do you see how I still have a negative down here? Now, the thing is, though, this is a solution. It's just not the best solution. So if you think about when we graph this, and I'll show you this in the book, when we graph this, we made a chart of that guy, that, and that, those corner points, 0, 0, 0, 60, 25, 40, and 65, 0, okay? All of these we put in our chart to try to find the max, okay? So what we just did here is we landed on one of those corner points, but it's not the best corner point. So let's see what this answer is, even though it is not the optimal solution. It's not best. I'm going to label the top columns x1, x2, slack 1, slack 2, z, and then I have my totals over here. All right, so x1, if you look at this column, it is ugly. So it is not basic. We're going to set it equal to 0. So that would say 0 of the canoes. X2 is basic. It has a 0 with just one number. So we're going to go ahead and solve that. 300 divided by 5 is, what is that, 60? Okay. Slack 1 is basic because it's pretty with one number. 25 divided by 5 is 5. And then let's see, slack 2 is ugly, non-basic. We said it equals 0. And in the corner, we get z equals, and we just have to divide by 1, so it's not going to do much, $1,800. Okay, so if you remember when we made the chart for this, this would have been one of our corner points, okay? So this is what, 0.60? So 0 of the what? Canoes and 60 kayaks gives you a profit of 1,800. So where is that? That's that corner point right there. And so in your chart, that would have been an answer, but it's not optimal. It's not the best solution, okay? And so how do we know that that's not the best solution? Well, if you look, we still have a negative in our bottom row. So this is an answer. It's just not the best. So we have to keep pivoting to try to find the max, okay? So how do I know? Well, you got a negative in the bottom row right there, -1. So again, most negative, well, you only have 1. So obviously that's the most negative. Now you're going to do your ratios to decide how to pivot. So you're going to take 25 divided by 1, which is 25. You're going to take what? 300 divided by 4. What is that? 150, I think that's 75. And you're going to pivot on the smallest ratio. So our pivot is now up here at 1. Okay, so what I want you to do is rewrite the permanent row and try to do that pivot. So try to cancel the 4 and try to cancel the -1 down here. That's going to be pretty. All right, I'm going to pause. I'm going to do those pivots and then we'll talk more. All right, so first I want to cancel the 4, and my scratch one's looking pretty nasty here, but I'm going to take row 1 times a -4 to make that happen. So when I do that, I get a -4, 0, -24, 0, -100. Now notice row 2 is already a 4, so I can just leave that alone. So I did. I just rewrote it. Oopsie, sorry, just rewrote it. Then I added, got 0, 5, -20, 5, 0, 200. This is positive, so that's good. So that's my new row 2. So I'm going to come up here, 0, 5, -20, 5, 0, 200, and write that. That's my new row 2. Now, the nice thing is, if you notice, row 1 has a 1, and my bottom row has a -1. Those cancel as is. So you don't need to multiply at all. You can just add row 1 with row 3 because they're already opposites. Okay, so you don't need to do anything. So I took row 1, wrote it down, row 2, wrote it down, added them together, and got 0, 0, 5, 5, 1, 1,825. That's my new row 3. So I'm going to write that up here in my matrix. So you can do work on scratch paper, just not in the matrix. All right, so I'll get rid of my scratch paper here. So here is, after I did my second pivot, this is what I have, okay? Notice, look in the bottom row. What do you notice? There are no negatives in the bottom row. That is awesome because that tells you you are done and that this is a maximum, okay? So let's look at this. And again, let's label what our columns are. X1 for column 1, X2, slack 1, slack 2, Z, and then our totals over on the right. Okay, so X1 is basic. It's easy with one number. So I'm going to take 25, the total divided by 1. So that's just 25. And I believe those were, if we go back to our Z, way back in the beginning, all right, that was our canoes. So I know that is how many canoes we should get. All right, X2 is, ooh, that's basic too, 200 divided by 5. So that would be what, 40 kayaks. And then notice slack 1 and slack 2 are ugly. We would say those are non-basic. So our slack 1 and slack 2 are 0, which what that means is we used everything. We didn't need anything to pick up the slack. And then our Z is in the corner right here, and dividing by 1 is not going to do anything, but if it's not a 1, you do it. So that is what we're going to maximize profit at. All right, so there's our final answer.